Alright, hello, welcome back to another Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle video here. Not too long ago, at the time I'm recording this at least, I did make a sort of defense calc video tutorial. You know, how you could do it yourself, you know, how to set up the dock and everything. Which is pretty easy. I'll have that linked down here if you want to check that out. But you know, from that video, as well as just in general, over the time I've made content, I have had several people at various points asking for advice on that sort of defense stuff, and just not to say that the people on the recent thing were new players, but I have had several like new players, so I figured, and just plainly, like when I first started this game, it took me like years to fully understand this stuff. I mean, it's a mobile game, but it's pretty complex, unless, I mean, even when you do like fully start trying to look into everything, it can be pretty complicated. But I mean, just from an outsider glance, I mean, they gotta figure out how to make the tutorial better or something. I feel like it'd be pretty helpful if they do implement a way to start like showing like defense like on super or when you're getting hit and stuff. I feel like that'd be a really good step to helping a lot of people understand more of this stuff. But essentially, I wanted to make as like comprehensive a guide as I can, covering just defense in general in this game. So this is going to cover a lot of stuff. I might miss something. I hope I don't. But essentially, you know, this is going to be how do you figure out, you know, character defense or however, I don't know what exactly I'm going to title this, but I'm just going to cover a lot of systems, try to be as in-depth as possible while also not, you know, going too long. So, I mean, we'll see how this goes. I did actually pull up several characters here, obviously. So, I suppose what we should start with, let me just go to, this is the new, where's Tao? Here's Tao, the new Tao. Okay. So, I am not the biggest fan of his details. I actually have not looked at, like a showcase or anything yet. So, I'm not sure how good he is. If you have the proper setup, I imagine he could be pretty insane, but I don't know about him at 55%. A big reason for that is Tao is someone who has 200% defense, and then when receiving an attack, 200% defense. That's all he has. He doesn't get anything on the super attack effects, so his defense, it's a little interesting to say the least. Now, that being said, Tao is a character that has 50% here, you know, plus another 30% here. So Tao at all times, so long as you have at least one other mission execution category ally on the team, he always has 80% damage reduction. Now that can be a really good combo if you have someone like Path to Power, who gives just support from stats, as well as he does give damage reduction support. Now, how damage reduction works is, let's say you're getting hit by a 10 million super, right? There's not, you're not going to run into that, but, well, how about this? A 5 million super, because that is, in some of the longer, harder content, you can run into numbers like that. If there's a 5 million super pointed at you, what Tao's going to do is he's going to immediately cut 80% of that. So before the damage even like fully hits him, it's cut down by 80%. So you go from a 5 million super to what's actually hitting him is a 1 million super. And that goes against his defense value, which, you know, that does sound pretty good in a sort of, in a vacuum, as long as he can eat a million super. But it is, which is why I said I'm not the biggest fan of him, because he needs support to be able to do the best. I mean, he will live that, keep in mind, but he'll take a lot of damage. So that's my big issue with him. Well, at least Rainbow Tao should eat it, because if I just pull up, I do have this sort of formula here, right? I mean, I could just input his stats real quick just to give you an idea. I mean, I did, do a calcs form in my sort of breakdown video, but just to show what Tao looks like. I mean, he is interesting. Now, he can get 7% defense in the link skill phase, but that's from Incredible Adventure. I mean, do any of these other links even... Is it literally just... Yeah, it's literally just Incredible Adventure, so... you do need to run him with other Dragon Ball Saga sort of characters to get that up. But let's say you have that up. Now, as I explained in the sort of defense calc video, when you're looking at something like this, even though it says 200% phase 1, because it's multiplication, I mean, you obviously have to have a 1 everywhere. I mean, if there's a 0, it won't compute. I mean, 8 times 1, for example, 8, I'm pretty sure everyone knows how multiplication works. So what you need to do, if it's 200%, it needs to be written as 3. So as you see here, a 7% increase, that's in the 100th place, in the decimal. And if you have, like a 50% increase, that would be, in the 10th place, something like this. But for Tao specifically, this is what he has. Now, this is a bit, well, hold on. It's not complete here, because he does also get, as soon as he starts to get hit. So, Dokkan can be really weird. You have to pay very close attention, especially when you're first starting out, to the wording. So this says when receiving an attack. So as soon as the attack goes to hit him, he gets this defense. So the defense is active for that attack. If the buff says something like after receiving an attack, the defense does not, or even if it's, if it's like attack, for example, it doesn't necessarily need to be defense. But if something says after, it does not proc until after the attack has hit you. If it says when, it procs before the attack hits you. So that is something to keep in mind. And also, Dokkan can be... You do need to pay very close attention to the wording in the passive. They can be a little tricky sometimes. But essentially, as soon as he goes to get hit, he has this. So that puts him at 611,023 if you have Incredible Adventure, no support, and he's Rainbow. So Tao, if he's facing, and this is where it gets even more complicated, if he's facing a type neutral, same class enemy, he's gonna take, like 300, late 300, like 80 some odd thousand damage. Now the reason I specify this, I did, that's why I have this sort of, pulled up here. I thought this was okay here. This is a pretty good graphic in here. I did already know how this worked, but I was trying to find a graphic to make it like as easy to explain as possible. So in this game, there's not only type advantage, and they don't do the best job of explaining it, but there is also class advantage. So super versus super types do, like, they do lower damage to each other. So if you're fighting a super class enemy, you'll do lower damage to the enemy, and the enemy will do lower damage to you. Super versus extreme, both for the enemy and for you, in no matter what order. If you're using super or extreme, doesn't matter. You will both do more damage to each other. If that makes any sense. Now, there's also the sort of type advantage, which obviously strength's better against physical, physical's better against int, int is better against tech, tech is better against AGL, AGL's better against strength. So, a full sort of loop there. So that is something you have to keep in mind. When I don't show, there are like calculators that people have for that sort of thing, that actually like show what a certain class and type character with some level of defense and damage reduction will take from certain enemies, right? So there are actual calculators. I don't have one like that just pulled up. I'm not sure exactly where to find them. I mean, it'd probably be pretty easy, but I don't personally, use them. But I do know they exist. So just keep this sort of graphic in mind when you're thinking about this type of stuff. Is both class and type do matter. So, same class type disadvantage, you're taking 25% more damage than you would have normally. So, I mean, if you take 1,000,000 damage, right? You're taking 1,250,000. It's sort of, well, it does apply like as it says after the damage calculation. So you do need to. The game could be very complicated. So just keep this in mind. It's better to just think about it in terms of class and type, or at least for me it is, than think, okay, same class type advantage, I'm gonna take, 45% of the damage I would have taken, right? It's, I just like to think of it in terms of to make it as basic as possible. If I'm fighting an extreme tech enemy, I'm not going to be putting a super AGL character of mine in front of that, hit unless I'm very, very confident in that character, if that makes any sense. So just shout out to this sort of graphic here. Like I said, I did already know how this worked, but I wanted to try and because, I mean, if you just look at this, or if you just have this explained, just like, what does this even mean? Even the graphic alone can be a little, when you first see it. But this is sort of how it works. So there's a lot to go in depth with how to figure out how a character is going to do defensively. So that being said, we do also have, where... Oh, you know what? I suppose I could now start explaining, and I probably should have figured out a particular order for this out at the beginning. I do apologize, but we're just going to bounce around here. I suppose at this point, it'd be a good time to explain the phases. Now, on here, obviously, I do have like phase 1, phase 2. It can take some getting used to fully understand it. Essentially, the best answer I can give is I will go over stuff, some various examples, but it really is something that you're just going to learn through experience, mostly. Uh, so that being said, when you have, and we'll use int Buhan here, when you're first, loading the character in, right? You do obviously have your leader skill buff, that the character has, and then besides that, all the character, like you load in turn 1, all the character should have is leader skill, phase 1, and links. Now, if, an ally is giving you, there are allies obviously in the game now. It's not a lot, but there are characters, like, Cell or, like Lord Slug. I'm trying to think of some recent characters. Int Broly's is an active skill, so right? Or I'm pretty confident his isn't. Yeah, his is an active skill, so it's there are characters where literally as soon as you start at the turn without doing anything, will give you a domain which will buff certain characters. Now, those domain effects do vary, so I'm not going to go into huge specifics here, but what I will say is different phases do matter. So if, you have the domain from Cell that gives you a 15% buff, and now Tau is not under Cell's domain, but just for example here, if you have a character, it's giving 15% buff. I mean, you go from 611,000 there to 702,000. It does make a very big deal because it's its own phase, which means you are actually getting a direct 15% buff. Since you just added that in, it's just going to be a complete 15% buff. Now, if you throw an extra 15% in phase 1, for example, it makes a difference, but it's not nearly as comparable, right? So different phases do really matter, getting buffs from different phases. But with phases, so with a character like Buhan, we do have a start of turn value. Now, it can be kind of confusing when certain abilities activate, but the best way to think about, and while there is overlap with both phase 1 and phase 2, the best way to think about it is, when does this ability activate? If the ability activates, or can be activated, I suppose, before the turn starts fully. So, like, when you're in control of the character, the turn's not fully started, right? When I say before the turn starts, I mean before the enemy starts hitting you. Or before you're, like, actually in the sort of combat. Like, I'm just talking about, like, the orb collection phase. So when you're in the orb collection phase, you will, as soon as you load in, have this buff. And as soon as you load in, you will have this buff. So when these sort of enemy, if it's written like this, when there's a super class enemy or an extreme class enemy, this is a sort of start a turn, phase 1, sort of buff. Now, something like for every key sphere obtained, this is, like I said, there can be a little bit of, it's not just plain and simple. So for key spheres, because it's actually activated before this sort of, the combat phase starts, this is still a phase 1 buff, even though you have to make an action for it to work. So, if you get 10 key spheres, right, this is a phase 1 buff, even though you have to do an action for it to work. Now, something that says, like, when attacking, when receiving an attack, when evading, stuff like that, those type of wordings are phase 2. So a lot of phase 2s will just be, like, active during the combat phase after a certain action is taken. But there are also cases like Khalifa and Kill here, where it's like for every attack performed, you get a certain buff. Now, if it's worded like this, for every attack performed, this is a buff that's going to, as soon as you get it, you have it. So if you get your first 4, you get your 4 attacks turn 1, you do have that phase 2 160% buff forever until you transform them. Which I suppose is another thing that's worth noting. When you have, and these are actually the perfect character for it, when you have a character that does stack like they do, so this is a permanent stack, this is 50% to both. What will stay when you transform into Kefla is your stacks. That's all that will stay. So you don't, if you go into Kefla, you don't keep any of the passive at all. What does stay is the super attack effect. So that is another thing to keep in mind. Why like stacking characters are very. I mean, I'm biased. I really like stacking characters. There are people that don't, but for me, stacking it's a lot of fun. It can give you a lot of power. So they are pretty important to have, at least in my opinion. And obviously, I mean, Dokkan seems to agree themselves, considering the wide variety of stacking characters we've gotten recently. But that being said, stacks, once again, will stay when you go into Kefla, but none of this other stuff will. So that is something why they have like their own. That's their own separate phase. They're not in phase 2. They're not in phase 1. Everything it's all its own separate calculation. So just if you get 10 stacks in Khalifa and Kale, which it is important for a character like them to stack as much as you can, because they stack defense and attack, while Kefla only stacks attacks. So you do want to make sure you get a decent bit of stacks with them. Now this is actually another pretty important thing to note. With this character, I mean, she's actually just a really good character to explain some things. So when you get your first 4 attacks, you do have this buff, obviously, as long as you're in Khalifa and Kale. Now, the second you transform, your defense is going to look significantly worse because that 160% phase 2 buff will be gone. However, it's only going to be worse visually, which is why I said earlier, I think Dokkan really does need to find some sort of way to implement showing defense, like when you're being hit, or when on super, similar to how they do with attack. Because the value here, when receiving an attack, that's 200%. That is a phase 2 buff, and it is when receiving, not after receiving. So once again, when receiving, before the attack even hits you, it's active. So you actually are stronger defensively. You do have 40% stronger, or 40% higher phase 2 buff than in base, but visually it will look worse even though it's better. So that can be a little tricky like that. But I mean, that is sort of how that works. Now also, something like this buff, this is actually another good thing. I did explain, the key spheres. This is a sort of key sphere buff that actually is phase 2. So you do need 6 key spheres to activate this effect, but the effect only procs when attacking. So it's not like you have, if you get your 6 orbs, in Khalifa and Kale, you have 160. It's not like you have 70% higher. This 30% only procs when you have 6 key spheres and when attacking. So it does say when attacking, so that is phase 2. Which I know, with a Buhan, it says for key sphere, every key sphere obtained. So the wording that's what I'm really trying to hammer in, like, throughout this entire thing. You really, really, really need to pay attention to the exact wording of the passive. And that's why I said experience is going to trump all. If you have enough experience playing the game, reading the kits, whatever, I mean, everyone makes mistakes from time to time, but more or less, you should be able to look at a kit after enough experience and be like, so this is how this works, this is how this works. Now, obviously, maybe like the exact numbers, you're not going to be able to, calculate all that in your head. But you should have an idea of when certain abilities will activate, which is important because when they activate will determine, for the most part, being phase 1 or phase 2. I did cut briefly there to take a small break, but continuing on, I do think another sort of character that is worth taking a look at would be Hidden God Goku. Now, what's important about them is they do have some pretty unique design here. Now, the whether or not you want to consider the uniqueness frustrating or not, like this ability I despise because they can only get up to, depending on your hidden potential, 4 attacks, right? So you can never get this full build up in one turn, which it's fine if you can't get the full build up of an ability in one turn. But when it's not fine is when you have to rotate them off and you only have missed one single sort of multiplicative buff there, so or phase 2 buff, the 20%. So I mean that is kind of annoying there, but what I want to actually touch on specifically was this right here. So with Hidden God Goku, this is actually, and there are other characters that have abilities like this. This is actually a phase 1 buff. Now, one of the big things, I was pointing out is when the action takes place is a big way in how to determine whether it's a phase 1 or phase 2 action. Now, because a lot of phase 2 buffs do, are when attacking or whatever, it can make a buff like this potentially confusing. Especially because, if you rotate them between slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, or slot 1 and 2, and then slot 3, you will see, right, that the defense is actually not going to change dependent on them being in slot 1 or in slot 3. So you'd think, okay, this is a phase 2 buff because I can't see it immediately. That'd be too easy. So how this buff actually works, it is not active immediately, even though it is a phase 1 buff. So this buff actually activates once the turn order has been completely what's the word I want to use here? Decided, I guess. Once the turn order has been completely decided for the combat phase. So, as long as you have Hidden God Goku in slot 1 or 2, if the buff is worded like this, it will actually activate essentially the second you collect orbs with your third character. So as soon as you collect the orbs with your third character, the turn order has been decided for the combat phase. So immediately this buff will activate. So it does still activate before the combat phase. Literally, like the second you collect the orbs with your third character, this buff will activate. So it is a phase 1 buff, but you can never actually see it visually. So, I mean, that is another sort of confusing thing. They do like to have several characters like this. Another character that comes to mind, although, I mean, they're kind of old at this point, is Vegeta and Trunks. Dokkan Fest LR. I mean, there's a lot of characters, but that's just the first one that comes to mind. So, if you see a buff worded like this, this is actually going to be a phase 1 ability. Whereas, when attacking like this is phase 2. These, for every attack received or evaded, this is a phase 2. This is also a phase 2. And this is a phase 1. This is a phase 1. So, like I said, the big sort of determination and I know I already said it, but I really want to hammer in, is when the ability activates. And once again, you will get a better understanding with more experience. Once you understand what a lot of the wordings mean, you just got to get used to them essentially, and then you should be able to determine pretty easily when an ability is phase 1 or phase 2. So I do think I do actually want to take a look at. Well, I suppose I actually haven't talked about guard yet. So, and I do have this character pulled up. I'll speak on him after. So damage reduction, how that works, like I said before, is when the attack goes to target you before it even hits you, is when it is cut down. So if you have the 5 million super, right? You cut it, using Tao's damage reduction, you cut it by 80%, then it's a 1 million super. So how guard works is the attack goes to hit you, right? And then it activates as it hits you. So they actually activate in two separate. I don't know if it's necessarily correct to say phases, but they do. I mean, it is sort of. Obviously, they're not like stats in the terms of like these, the percentages, but they do activate at separate times, maybe is the better way to say that. So damage reduction activates before the attack hits you. Guard activates as the attack is hitting you. So what that means is also, I suppose, worth pointing out, guard is roughly worth 50% damage reduction. Which I know can sound a little confusing. But it roughly cuts the attack as it's hitting you by half. So it's not like, you have a character who has damage reduction and has guard, right? It's not like, you get the 50% from guard on top of whatever damage reduction they have. Like I said, they are separate sort of timed activated abilities, phases, I guess. Guard is worth 50% damage reduction, but you don't add that damage reduction to anything else. It's its own separate thing. It's its own pool. So it's 50%. It always stays 50%. It doesn't matter. Well, there are certain things. True type and true true type advantage and disadvantage do still matter, even with guard. But that uses the hidden potential. Which can I even pull up the hidden potential on here? I actually don't know if there's even a way to do that in Dokkan Info. Maybe I could, what if I go to items and then equipment? Maybe I could do it that way. Let's see. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. We'll find out here real quick. Yes, here, this is what I was looking for. Okay, so these attack boost and defense boost, you will see in your hidden potential as for characters. These are buffs that activate when you have true type advantage or true type disadvantage. So even if you have guard, you can take slightly more or slightly less and damage or deal. Just in the terms of defense, you can take slightly more or slightly less depending on if you are true type advantage or true type disadvantage. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily completely ignorable amount, it is more or less negligible. You don't really need to worry about it too much. So just as long as you keep in mind, even with guard, true type and true type advantage and disadvantage do matter. So, you know, even with guard, if you have a physical character, they will still take slightly more from strength, and they will still take slightly less from int. So just keep that in mind. But it's not the biggest deal. If your strongest character is a physical type against a strength enemy, and you do have guard, you don't need to be like, well, even though they're my strongest character, they're still going to take more damage. If they're your strongest character, and they have the guard, they will still be the strongest character. It's not the biggest amount of extra damage or extra tank, but it is a little bit. I figured it was worth mentioning. Hopefully that's not too confusing. So now that leads us to something that's really insane, is when you take a look at Vegeta here. This is obviously he goes into Vegito. This is the tag part to the Goku. Now, when you take a look at his passive, I mean, at first glance, I can understand why maybe like a newer player or someone who isn't familiar fully with how passives and everything works, why they wouldn't think it's the strongest. I mean, you look at this, he just has 200% defense. I mean, that's it. There's no other defense. I mean, he does stack. He gets several supers, so he can stack a lot. Which, as you can see, this is a 50%, this is a 30%. Which, by the way, in game, the way you can usually tell, is if something says like greatly raise attack, for one turn and raise defense, that is still part of like the same. They can be a little weird with the wording on that stuff sometimes, but that is still part of the same line. It's still a one-turn buff. What really is important is in Dokkan, how they will show it is there will be like a comma. So it'll be like raise attack greatly for one turn, comma, raise defense. So either it shows a distinction, a clear distinction between these two. Like if you look at like even if you don't have him, right? For example, if you look at Vegeta in game, which anyone can using the sort of Dokkan Awakening tab, and you look at Vegeta, there will be a comma that separates, so you can actually see whether or not that sort of super attack effect is actually a stack or if it's just like a one turn or something. But why this is like such a strong kit right here is even with only the 200% defense, in which you can stack, but he has 50% damage reduction. Then, when receiving an attack with 10 or more ki, an additional 20%. So because of that wording, it's immediately active, so he has 70% damage reduction. Now, in slot 1, he also has guard. So let's say we're taking the same 5 mil super, we use as an example for Tao. Firstly, Vegeta cuts it by 70%. So he cuts the 5 mil super by 3,500,000. So the value left of the super is 1,500,000. Makes sense so far? Then, because guard activates as the attack is hitting you, damage reductions before, guard is as the attack hits you. So then, that 1.5 mil is reduced by a further 50%. Because, like I said, guard is roughly worth 50% damage reduction. Although you don't, it's not like, oh, I have 120% damage reduction because I have 70 plus 50. Nope, they're separate things entirely. It's just that's what it's worth, roughly. So you take that 1.5 mil super, and it cuts by 50%. So now it's worth 750,000. So that super that started out at 5 million damage before it even touches you is now worth 750,000. So even though he only has 200% defense phase 1, if you do get, some stacks with him, he can be very, very crazy. So that is probably like the strongest combo in the game. If you see a character that has guard, that has damage reduction, they do work in hand because damage reduction's before the attack hits you, guard is as the attack is hitting you. So they activate separate times, and it's a really strong sort of cohesion between the two, I guess. So it's that. Listen, there's a lot that goes into defense with this game. I think this probably should be good enough. I hope. Um, I did explain a lot of stuff here. This is pretty in depth. I think this should be good though. I do hope. I suppose just to end off with something to make note of is when you're having a character that stacks, and I suppose we can use just this Vegeta as an example, right? So just this show, he does get the 200%, phase 1. So written as 3. Then obviously we have the leader skill 5.4. What is the exact 15,188? Oh, I suppose that is another thing worth noting. Real quick here. Now, even before a character does come out in game, we can actually tell what their max stats will be. Dokkan uses a specific formula to determine the raw stats. So if you take a look at any character you have in game, how it will work is, and I don't have them all. I'm not going to pretend that I have everything about that memorized. But essentially, what you should keep in mind is it's either going to be, I think it's int. Int is 5,000 flat. So, okay. When Dokkan shows like they post the info for a character on Twitter, they post the stats at 0%. So when you are 55%, and there are different hidden potential formulas based off if the character is summonable or free to play. There has been some overlap between those two, but more or less, when a character is 55%, they have an additional 2,000 to everything shown. So, if you take Tao, for example, right, you can see this is his base max. This is what they post on Twitter. This is his actual value you will have, because, I mean, you just get the character, you level them up, to SA10. You do your... Well, do you actually even... Because that bottom right path, it does need... It does need SA level, but I don't know what the exact cutoff is. But essentially, you just get your character to SA10, right? And then you do the hidden potential. And then you just have, if your character is 55%, you have an additional 2,000. Now, the formula changes between types, but essentially, int type at 100% will have an additional 5,000 to all of their base max. And then the other types, strength, AGL, tech, and physical, all have varying degrees. So one of the stats will be 4,600 extra. One of the stats will be 5,000 extra. and one of the stats will be 5,400 extra. So they do. Not every character gets the same amount of stats from the hidden potential. That is something to keep an eye on, because obviously, when I'm going over all of the defense of a character, the most important value at the end of the day is the raw defense. Just point blank, the most important thing is your raw defense. Now, a lot of people don't so much like doing the raw stats, but for me, in my hidden potential, when I can, even if it's like an additional 500, the raw defense bronze equip or something. I am someone who, in my hidden potential, when I make my characters, I do try to have as much raw stats as possible, because at the end of the day, the raw stats of the character are what you can massively influence to increase the rest of the kit by, at least in my opinion, a pretty decent deal. So do keep that in mind. I mean, at the end of the day, this number that you will see, on your character screen or whatever, is the most important thing. But just real quick here, as I was doing before, right? We do have, and we'll just say, I mean, what can he have? I suppose like prepared for battle. We'll just say 5%, right? So 1.05. We'll take that off, and then I mean this is what a rainbow Vegeta is at defensively. Now this doesn't look that good, but once again, with that damage reduction guard combo, I mean that's insane. And then once you start getting, the supers in, he does at 20 key have a guaranteed super. In slot 1, he has a guaranteed additional that has a great chance of becoming a super, which also, that is another thing to note. When they say great in super attack effect, they mean 50%. When they say great on a character passive, that is 70%. So there is variation between those two. So, if you see a great chance to dodge, that's not a 50%. A high chance to dodge is 50%. But in the super attack effect, great is 50%. So if something says, in the super attack effect, if it's massive, that's 100%. And then the raise attack defense, if it just says raise, that can vary between 20 and 30%. It depends on, if it's a stack or what. But essentially, 20, 30, 50, and 100% are the numbers to keep in mind. 20 and 30% respectively being for if it just says raise. If it says greatly raised, that's a 50%. If it says massively raised, that's 100%. But the passive has its own different wordings. Great means 70 there. High means 50. Medium means 30. And then like rare is like 15. And then like chance is like 5 or something. Like once you get past medium, just ignore it essentially, because it's pretty rough. It's not really going to get activated all that often. But with Vegeta, right, we do get the 50%. Let's say we get our 4 super turn, right? We get our 50%, which, by the way, this is an increase, obviously, of the sort of defense before, like, we got, the super. So it's not like, we got a 50% increase from 258,000. It's not like now we do a 50% increase from 387,000. It's still a 50% increase from our starting value, if that makes any sense. Although, to be fair, now, after the 18 key, it does go down to... So every 18 key is 50%, but every 12 key is 30%. So now it's, 1.8. So this is 80%, and then this is 2.1, 110%, and then 2.4, 140%. So you can raise defense by 140% in one turn with Vegeta. And once again, this is important because, I mean, that's 620,000. And once again, I mean, that 5 mil super, I mean, 750 going against 620. I mean, that's pretty good. Now, once again, like true type and true type advantage and disadvantage are important things, but because of his guard and like damage reduction and everything, for a character like Vegeta, you more or less, I mean, once again, it does still matter, but it's not going to be the biggest deal when you have guard. What you really need to worry about true type and true type advantage and disadvantage is when, you know, the character doesn't well, I mean, I suppose for true type disadvantage specifically is you need to worry about when you don't have guard. But I mean, there we go. I think that should be. Well, I could just show, you know, say the next turn, right? You know, you get that extra 50%. You know, once again, this is not a 50% from 620,000. It's a 50% from that like original defense. So I mean, even though we get 50% there, we're at 749,208. So just making sure that is clear. It's an increase from the original value, because if you think about it like this, it's 58,000 being increased by, you know, you're timesing it by a percentage. It's not, because I mean, this is, you know, multiplication really. So it's not like, you know, we do the 30% increase from 749,000. We still do the 30% increase from the value before this phase is considered, if that makes sense. So I hope, I pray that this is comprehensive enough. I would have to imagine it. I think I've covered more or less everything. I hope I've given everything enough detail. It can be pretty complicated, and I know this is pretty long, but hopefully this this makes sense at least. That is, I was trying to use examples throughout the entire thing, like visual examples to show you. So hopefully it all makes sense. And you have a better understanding, maybe not even a perfect understanding, but at least a much better understanding than you did going into this. But I think that more or less covers everything, at least off the top of my head. I did try to, you know, give a vague, well, not vague, but just cover like all of the sort of different wordings for the phase. Once again, I mean, that's going to really be determined. I mean, even if you know the wordings, once again, you're gonna have to have experience, like reading the kits, using the characters, and that's when it's really going to start to make more and more sense the more you use it. But hopefully this was all good enough, you know, that you have a better understanding. But I at least I think it's good enough. I'm gonna end this here. This is probably very long. I don't know exactly, but I'm very confident this is pretty long. Maybe like 40-50 minutes or something. But you know, we can end this here. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you were able to learn at least something. You know, if you went into this not knowing about some of the stuff. But that'll do it here. Take care.